Look at the light coming through your window and you will see it. Dust, drifting, the most boring thing in your house. But the last time this planet froze, that dust fell incredibly thick. It fell so thick and for so long that it buried whole countries. And it is the only reason anyone survived to be born. You have seen the popular picture of the Ice Age. Everyone has. A massive wall of white, snow to the horizon. A figure in fur, head down, pushing through an endless blizzard. Mammoths going gray behind the falling flakes. Now, delete that picture. It did not come from a dig site. It came from illustrators and film studios, copied too many times. It is not a memory. It is just a drawing. Because the strangest fact about the Ice Age is that it barely snowed. Think about that for a second. The coldest stretch of time we lived through. The period we named after ice, and the sky was mostly empty. Clear. Dry. Dry the way a desert is dry. So where did all the ice come from? And what was falling instead? That is the question this whole video is built around. The answer comes from 8 separate places on this planet. Starting with a hole drilled 2 miles into Antarctica. 800,000 years of sky stacked at Dome Sea, East Antarctica. There is absolutely nothing here. No mountains, no coast, no life. Just 3 kilometers of ice sitting on top of a buried continent. Between 1996 and 2004, a European team called Epica drilled here. They pulled up a cylinder of ice over 3,000 meters long. That column of ice is not just frozen water. It is a stack of winters. Every year, snow falls here, does not melt, and gets crushed. Do that without interruption, and you get a perfect diary of the planet. Near the top, you can count the layers with your eyes, like tree rings. Further down, the weight squeezes each year thinner than a fingernail. The deepest ice they reached fell as snow 800,000 years ago. Long before our species existed, before any modern human took a breath. And when you look closely at that ice, you find something unexpected. Trapped inside the ice, in thin dark bands, is dust. Mineral dust, blown thousands of kilometers from the other side of the world. Drifting down onto Antarctica and getting sealed in forever. There is no soil at Dome Sea. No rock within 1,000 kilometers. Every single grain of dust in that core arrived by air. In 2008, researcher Fabrice Lambert published the measurements of that dust. 8 full glacial cycles, and here is what he found. During the warm periods, like right now, the ice is clean. But during the cold periods, the dust goes up by 25 times. Not 25%. 25 times more dust. Every single glaciation across nearly 1 million years shows the same signal. And here is why that is so important. It is not about the number. It is about what dust in the air actually requires. Dust cannot travel through wet air. Rain scrubs dust out of the sky. It is the planet's air filter. For dust to travel across oceans to Antarctica, the sky has to be dry. The water cycle had wound down. Less rain meant more dust. The ice cores did not just record an ice age. They recorded a global drought. If you find this unsettling, subscribe, because our next stop is a lake in Africa. A lake that lost almost all of its water while the north was freezing solid. A colder atmosphere holds less water vapor. That is simple physics. Drop global temperature, and the sky's carrying capacity drops with it. Then lock up a third of the northern water as ice, and it never comes back down. So the world got colder, and the colder it got, the less it snowed. The ice sheets were built by thin snowfall that never, ever melted. Just a few centimeters a year, banked for 100,000 years. An ice sheet is not a record of storms. It is a record of restraint. And every year it failed to rain, the bare ground lifted into the wind. Off dried riverbeds, off the crushed rock at the edge of glaciers. It went up, it traveled, and it came down somewhere else. Which raises the question, what was actually covering the Ice Age world? Africa, 135,000 years ago. The lake that almost wasn't. In the southern African tropics, there is a body of water called Lake Malawi. It is one of the deepest lakes on Earth, holding incredible fish diversity. In 2005, a team led by Christopher Scholes did something absurd. They trucked an ocean drilling rig overland into landlocked Africa. They mounted it on a barge and drilled deep into the lake floor mud. Nobody had ever pulled a long climate record out of Middle Africa before. Everything we thought we knew had been inferred from scraps. What came up broke the story everybody had been telling. Because during the Ice Age, Lake Malawi lost at least 95% of its water. Let that sink in. One of the deepest lakes in the world, almost completely dry. The pollen in those layers nearly stops. There was no vegetation left. There was not even enough plant matter alive to sustain a serious fire. Rainfall dropped under 400 millimeters a year. That is scrubland. This was on the shore of what should be one of the wettest places in Africa. These African megadroughts were worse than anything we imagined. While ice sheets grew in the north, tropical Africa was turning to dust. The Ice Age is usually filed in our heads as a northern problem. Something that happened to Europe and Canada while everyone else carried on. It wasn't. It was a planetary water shortage. If you were an early human in Africa, you never saw a single snowflake. You just watched the water go away. Which brings us to the next question, how did anything large stay alive? And here is where it gets extraordinary, because the answer is the exact opposite of what you would guess. Alaska, 36,000 years ago. The bison in the gold mine. July 1979. A gold mining operation near Fairbanks is hosing away frozen silt. The water cuts through the permafrost, and a hoof emerges from the wall. Then a leg, then a whole animal, perfectly preserved. They call in biologist Dale Guthrie. What he excavates is a complete steppe bison. Hide, hair, muscle, and fat, frozen solid for 36,000 years. The flesh had a strange blue mineral crust, so they named him Blue Babe. Guthrie could read the animal's death like a police report. Claw marks on the hide, punctures spaced exactly like a lion's teeth. A piece of a lion's tooth was still lodged in the neck. Killed in late autumn, then frozen so fast the predators couldn't finish it. And yes, in 1984, Guthrie and his colleagues cooked a piece of it in a stew. He said it was tough, and tasted of the earth it had been buried in. I have questions, but I also respect the commitment. But here is what makes Blue Babe so important. It is his stomach content. Guthrie spent his career reconstructing the world this bison lived in. Ice Age Alaska was not a snowfield. It was grassland. Dry, wind-scoured, sun-exposed, treeless grass steppe. They call it the Mammoth Steppe, the largest single ecosystem on Earth. And notice what is missing from it. No forests. Trees need reliable water and shelter from wind, and there was neither. What grew instead were grasses with deep roots and short growing seasons. And it was crowded with mammoths, woolly rhinos, horses, and bison. This frozen, hostile world supported more large animals than it does today. Modern Alaska, warm and green and forested, is actually emptier. Think about that. The place got warmer and lost its animals. So what were they eating in the middle of a glaciation? Grass. Standing dead grass, cured on the stem like hay, still nutritious. And it was reachable because the snow was so thin. And there was one place where the snow was thinnest of all. Siberia, 71 degrees north. The site that shouldn't exist. The Yana River runs north through Arctic Siberia to the ocean. A Russian geologist hunting fossils found something in the riverbank. It was a spear shaft, carved from the horn of a woolly rhino. Excavations began in 2001 under Vladimir Patulko. What they found made the entire field stop and reread the papers. The Yana site sits deep inside the Arctic Circle. And it dates to 27,000 years ago, in the middle of a glaciation. This was twice as old as any previously accepted human presence in the Arctic. People were already living at the top of the world, in the deep cold. And they were thriving, leaving behind hundreds of stone and bone tools. Carved mammoth ivory, punches made from wolf bones, and needles. Bones of horse, reindeer, hare, and birds scattered around. And here is the detail that ties it all together: horses cannot dig. A reindeer can hammer through hard crust with its hooves. A horse can only sweep light snow aside with its muzzle. In deep or hard snow, a horse simply starves on top of its food. So a landscape with horses is, by definition, a landscape with almost no snow. Those horse bones are not just garbage. They are weather data. These people were not surviving the Arctic despite the climate. They were there because of it. Cold, dry, and snow-free. It meant the herds could feed all winter, and humans could hunt them. But here is the thing nobody tells you, and it turns everything upside down. Moravia, 29,000 years ago. The village made of dust. Southern Czech Republic. 2 settlements, Dolní Věstonice and Pavlov. This was one of the densest concentrations of human activity on the planet. The finds are extraordinary: mammoth bone structures, hearths, and art. A burial of 3 young people, laid out with deliberate care and red ochre. The Venus of Dolní Věstonice, a small ceramic female figure. Deliberately shaped and fired in a kiln, the oldest ceramic object known. Not pottery for cooking, but pottery for meaning, thousands of years early. And then there is the discovery of woven impressions in the clay. Woven plant fibers, cordage, netting, and textiles from 26,000 years ago. These people had string, they had nets, they had a textile industry. Nets change everything. They let everyone contribute to gathering food. But look down at what these camps are actually built on. The hills here are made of loess, which is wind-blown silt. Rock ground to flour by glaciers, dried, and carried by the wind. It piles up, meters of it, tens of meters deep. It is the exact same dust that Lambert measured in Antarctica. And here it is, forming the very foundation of this ancient village. Loess holds water like a sponge and drains perfectly. It grows grass. Grass feeds the mammoths, the horses, and the reindeer. And those animals feed the people. The dust was the resource. And that completely inverts the entire premise of the Ice Age. The cold was survivable. Humans solved the cold with fur and fire. What we have never solved is water in the wrong state. Cold and dry is a pantry. Cold and wet is a sealed vault. The enemy was never temperature. It was precipitation. Which leads to the terrible question: what happens when the snow comes back? China, the last glacial maximum. A plateau made of sky. Fly over north-central China, and you will see a landscape of yellow hills. Canyons with vertical walls that crumble in your hand. Loess. This is the Chinese Loess Plateau, covering an area the size of France. In some places, the dust deposit is over 150 meters deep. None of it is bedrock. All of it fell out of the air. Ground off the mountains of Central Asia and carried east by the wind. It stacks in layers, reading like an ice core made of dirt. Thick pale layers from cold glacial times, dark red layers from warm times. 2 archives, 2 hemispheres, agreeing line for line. The peak of that dust deposition lines up with the coldest window. Between 26,000 and 19,000 years ago. When the sea was over 100 meters lower than it is today. Sea level dropped because the water moved. It didn't vanish. It evaporated, blew inland, and froze into massive ice sheets. Water was subtracted from the ocean and the sky at the same time. And look at what surfaced, a massive land bridge between Siberia and Alaska. Dry ground where the North Sea is now, coastlines pushed far out. Millions of square kilometers of bare seabed, drying in the wind. The colder it got, the more water was locked up, and the drier the air became. Continental shelves dried into dust factories. Rivers shrank. Forests retreated into small refuges, and the wind moved the dust. Peak ice meant peak desert. And that is what kept the herds fed. The ice sheets took the water, leaving the ground bare and the grass exposed. The frozen world was open for business because it was starving for rain. Which means the danger was never the cold getting worse. It was the cold getting better. Greenland, 14,700 years ago. The day it started snowing. There is a moment in the Greenland ice cores where the layers suddenly change. The dust drops away, the chemistry jumps. The world started warming. And warming does one thing above all others, it puts water back in the air. Warmer atmosphere, more evaporation, more moisture, more precipitation. The cores record a large, abrupt jump in snow accumulation. A shift that happened incredibly fast, possibly within just a few years. Inside a single human life, someone was born into one world and buried in another. And nothing they did could stop it. The snow was burying their world. Think about what that means on the ground. Snow deep enough to bury the grass. Meltwater with nowhere to drain turns firm ground into bog. Wet, waterlogged soil favors moss and shrubs, not grass. Moss is not food. A mammoth needs an enormous volume of grass every single day. The mammoth steppe, the biggest ecosystem on Earth, did not get killed by ice. It drowned. It got wet and green and gentle, and it starved. The land warmed, the land greened, and the land emptied. We don't know how much was climate and how much was human hunting. But the sequence is clear, the water came back first. Watch what people do next, because it tells you how bad it got. The big game specialists stop being big game specialists. Fish bones, shellfish, and bird bones climb in the rubbish heaps. Grinding stones appear. People start processing wild seeds. Within a few thousand years, someone starts putting seeds in the ground on purpose. The snow arrived, the grass vanished, and the people had to become something else. That is the story from the ice, from the mud, from the bone. It is tens of thousands of years old, unless somebody filmed it happening. Yamal Peninsula, Siberia, November 2013. The Yamal Peninsula juts north into the Kara Sea, the end of the world. Nenets herders live here, moving reindeer across vast distances. Reindeer feed all winter by pushing through soft snow to reach lichen. They can smash a thin crust, but that is the limit of their tolerance. In early November 2013, it rained. Rain that fell for 24 hours. Then the temperature crashed, and the whole peninsula turned to ice. Researcher Bruce Forbes published the account after interviewing herders. In a normal year, they can move the herd to softer snow. This time, there was none. The ice locked them out of pastures across 27,000 square kilometers. 61,000 reindeer starved to death in a single week. The largest recorded reindeer mortality episode in the region's history. And notice why, the food was still there, perfectly preserved under the ice. They starved standing on top of a full pantry with the door frozen shut. And it didn't get colder. It got warmer, warm enough for rain. The warmth put water in the air, the water fell as liquid, and the liquid killed. The same mechanism that ended the Ice Age world, witnessed by people today. So we come back to the dust. That dust is still here. It settled and it stayed, covering 1/10 of the land surface of this planet. The fertile soils of Ukraine, the American Midwest, and Argentina. All built on the silt that fell out of glacial winds. Loess is loose, deep, and easy to farm with a simple wooden stick. The disaster made the soil. Every civilization has been standing on it. Farming began on the debris of a catastrophe, and it isn't finished. Dust from the Sahara still crosses the Atlantic to fertilize the Amazon. The system that buried the Ice Age is running right now, quietly, above your head. So when you wipe the dust off your shelf, remember what it built. It is not just dirt. It is the foundation of our world. A gift left behind by a cold, dry, desperate planet. Look at the light coming through your window and you will see it. Dust, drifting, the most boring thing in your house. But the last time this planet froze, that dust fell incredibly thick. It fell so thick and for so long that it buried whole countries. And it is the only reason anyone survived to be born. You have seen the popular picture of the Ice Age. Everyone has. A massive wall of white, snow to the horizon. A figure in fur, head down, pushing through an endless blizzard. Mammoths going gray behind the falling flakes. Now, delete that picture. It did not come from a dig site. It came from illustrators and film studios, copied too many times. It is not a memory. It is just a drawing. Because the strangest fact about the Ice Age is that it barely snowed. Think about that for a second. The coldest stretch of time we lived through. The period we named after ice, and the sky was mostly empty. Clear. Dry. Dry the way a desert is dry. So where did all the ice come from? And what was falling instead? That is the question this whole video is built around. The answer comes from 8 separate places on this planet. Starting with a hole drilled 2 miles into Antarctica. 800,000 years of sky stacked at Dome Sea, East Antarctica. There is absolutely nothing here. No mountains, no coast, no life. Just 3 kilometers of ice sitting on top of a buried continent. Dust, drifting, the most boring thing in your house. But the last time this planet froze, that dust fell incredibly thick. It fell so thick and for so long that it buried whole countries. And it is the only reason anyone survived to be born. You have seen the popular picture of the Ice Age. Everyone has. A massive wall of white, snow to the horizon. A figure in fur, head down, pushing through an endless blizzard. Mammoths going gray behind the falling flakes. Now, delete that picture. It did not come from a dig site. It came from illustrators and film studios, copied too many times. It is not a memory. It is just a drawing. Because the strangest fact about the Ice Age is that it barely snowed. Think about that for a second. The coldest stretch of time we lived through. The period we named after ice, and the sky was mostly empty. Clear. Dry. Dry the way a desert is dry. So where did all the ice come from? And what was falling instead? That is the question this whole video is built around. The answer comes from 8 separate places on this planet. Starting with a hole drilled 2 miles into Antarctica. 800,000 years of sky stacked at Dome Sea, East Antarctica. There is absolutely nothing here. No mountains, no coast, no life. Just 3 kilometers of ice sitting on top of a buried continent.